And welcome to Watches Tonight, right here on Watchbox Studios. I'm your host, Tim Mosso. We have an unprecedented and full program for the evening. Everything from watches in Hong Kong and the effect that the unrest has had on Swiss exports to Patek versus Bulgari. Yes, really. A more traditional Omega versus Rolex, and why OEM watch brand online sales are pointless so far. All of this and viewer wrist shots tonight on Watches Tonight. Let me remind you who pays for these pixels, and let me tip you in, because your new favorite website is thewatchbox.com. Thewatchbox.com. Go to shop, go to new arrivals. It's like Christmas every day. The coolest new watches showing up. It's where I shop for my watches. And of course, you could see where I review my watches. Join me at Tim_Mosso on Instagram. All video reviews, plus if you thumb back far enough, you will find my old SIHH updates. But every day we do a watch video, and every day you get 60 seconds of watch goodness. It's also where I put the weird stuff that doesn't necessarily make it to Watchbox reviews. And finally, the images that you sent me, your highlights, the viewer wrist shots. All right, Bud D is, dealing with Patek Philippe Aquanaut in a sea of green. What's he dealing? No comment. Birkin E has superb taste in both watches and entertainment with his IWC Portuguese. That's a show right there. And that's a match. The matchmaker right here, speaking of Jared L., who bought his Black Bay from Jason Main at thewatchbox.com, paired here with Tesla Model X. Roll on. Ed H proposes a very different kind of watches and wheels scenario with his Rolex GMT Pepsi. Hey, that's refreshing. Send your wrist shots to Monday Mailbag at thewatchbox.com to see your pieces on these pixels. Jumping into the box, I can see we've got Richard T. Hello, Timmy. Hello, Richard. Jason Chan from New York City. Mark S. Sup, TLM. Sup, Mark. Jack Nunez. Asking Tim, what are your thoughts on the SDK4? Well, we've got quite a bit of program tonight, so we got to barrel right in. And then we've got hello from Boston. We've got Dustin Van Patten saying he loves our new Sunday morning show. Check out Watchbox Reviews, weekend watches every Sunday. Right here, we have Mohammed A. joining from the UAE, and we've got Robert Fletcher from San Francisco, and Richard Combe, an old friend of the house and a good friend from South Florida. Rooted Rotor, howdy Tim, howdy Rooted. Let's go right in. Okay, Brent L., one of your own, has asked, hi Tim, has the unrest in Hong Kong had any impact on the Swiss watch industry so far? Yes, there's no other way to frame this answer, and it has been dramatic and it has been immediate. Almost in real time, we have watched a drop-off in Swiss watch exports to Hong Kong since the beginning of protests. The protests began in earnest in late March. Initially, it was a protest over a extradition bill with the mainland, but what initially was a very focused protest related to a specific policy became a general protest and series of protests and spiraling protests against Hong Kong's creeping relationship with the mainland and the convergence of the two. So there has been a precipitous drop-off from March, April, May, especially June and July, to the point that Nope, that's not it right there. Most of the half-year updates from the Swiss watch industry are already demonstrating. So here's the drop-off in Hong Kong, which normally is the largest single national market for Swiss watch exports. For June, as protests escalated and the meat of the unrest really hit, Hong Kong was demoted to second as a national market behind the United States, which is just about unprecedented for Swiss watch exports. Ordinarily, Hong Kong would be way ahead of the US, not just because it's a huge market in its own right, but because it's also a regional distribution hub for luxury watch consumption in East Asia. Now, here's a look at the size of East Asia's huge share of global watch volumes and the corresponding drop in Swiss watches for June. Look how big the Far East is. By itself, it's bigger than all of Europe combined. Finally, here is the declining global trend of Swiss watch value exported for 2019. Look right around March when the protests started, and you could see a dramatic escalation of the decline, almost in real time, matching event for event in the news headlines. And just today, This is a second blow, unrelated, but also out of East Asia. The Chinese central bank weakened its currency below the critical level of 7 yuan per US dollar for the first time in a decade. A corresponding drop against the Swiss franc could have devastating impacts on mainland Chinese consumption of Swiss watches. And right now, right there at number 4 among national markets, that's mainland China, holding up the Swiss industry for the year, a bulwark against unrest in Hong Kong and economic decline or stagnation elsewhere in the world. If the Chinese yuan becomes too weak, and remember, the Swiss franc right now is more or less 1-for-1 against the US dollar, but if the Chinese yuan becomes too weak, you are going to see a dramatic scale back of Chinese consumption of Swiss watches as they just become relatively more expensive. It's a simple demand factor. And I'll also mention that we should buckle up because this could be a wild ride as Chinese currency retaliation against U.S. trade policies escalates and catches Swiss watches in the crossfire. And when I say this is going to be a wild ride, not just for the Swiss watch sector. We're in uncharted territory here. Right here, we have Russell 996 joining in. Russell, you are featured in tonight's wrist shot, so I'm glad to see you right there joining in from the UK. And then right here we can see there have been quite a few comments on this Chinese policy, but I'm going to answer Brian Samani's opinion on Jean Richard. Avoid any of the PVD cases, but in particular, I like the Times Square Sebring, a very cool non-round watch, interesting complication, distinctive Jean Richard timepiece, a great value compared to what it originally sold for. Just remember, it's basically a dead or moribund brand because it's a tenant brand. It's like Tudor to Rolex, but for Girard-Perregaux. Girard-Perregaux is a weak brand. Jean Richard is a weaker brand, and right now nothing is being done to promote the Jean Richard brand, so it's basically dead in the water, or dead absolutely. So if you find one used, great buy. Just remember, it's not a hot brand if that matters to you. It's just a cool watch, which I endorse. All right, now, Clive E. asks, with all of the attention and accolades won by the Bulgari Octo Finissimo Automatic, can we now consider it a true alternative to the well-worn and somewhat overpriced Patek Philippe Nautilus? It is tempting to make this comparison. And if you've been watching the Thursday show on this channel, you've probably heard talk to that effect. It's worth making the comparison long form to evaluate the claim. Since the similarities seem pretty obvious, just from the look of the watches from those images, let me clarify all the ways that these watches are different before directly addressing whether the Octo is a Patek alternative. First, there's water resistance. For the Octo, it's 30 meters, and 120 meters for the Patek, which means the Octo is not swimmable, the Nautilus definitely is. Second, the Patek has a loomed dial, and this is a big factor, because along with a full bracelet, water resistance, and automatic winding, that makes the Patek a true full-time sports watch. It's punched its credentials. It can also dress up right up to black tie if you want because it's a thin watch, 8.5 millimeters. The Octo is a sports casual watch, and this is critical. With the look to wear with anything, but practical limits about its water resistance and also in low light environments where you will need a light to see it. It's not loomed in any way. Third, and this is contrary to popular myth, the Bulgari is not a true Gerald-Genta design, even though it is often mistakenly attributed. Although the Octo style cases do date to the period before the mid-90s, when Gerald-Genta sold his brand and his factory to the Hourglass out of the Far East, and then subsequently it was resold to Bulgari. This is what the Octo case looked like back in the day. That's the Gerald-Genta Grand Sonnerie. So yes, it's an Octo. No, it's not the watch we know today. In contrast, the 1976 Nautilus, maybe I should back up a little, but from 2010, the Octo case, which was created under Bulgari ownership as a Gerald-Genta, but from 2010, the Octo case became a Bulgari by Gerald-Genta, and then the Gerald-Genta name, which you could see used to be at 6 o'clock on the dial, was dropped altogether. Okay, jumping back. In contrast to the tenuous Gerald-Genta link here, the 1976 Nautilus was a true work by his own hand, and it remains mostly unaltered from its original appearance. Fourth, this is the reason that they're different on a price basis, and price is so important with watches, let's be perfectly honest. The Octo costs $13,900 in its definitive titanium, automatic, and full bracelet form. Used, expect to pay around $10,000 to $11,000 for that same watch. That is good resale by Bulgari men's watch standards, but the Patek is a different class of price and hysteria. The Patek retails for $30,620 US new, which I should mention is up about $8,000 from its retail price back at the beginning of 2018. So Patek is clearly cashing in, but things go crazy from there with a used price right out of the dealer's box of $60,000 to $70,000. I thought I was talking about this being a $40,000 to $50,000 watch just the other day, and I feel like at the beginning of this day, this morning, we were talking about this being a $50,000 to $60,000 watch. Now we're talking about the big 7.0, and there's no end in sight. Even with a new movement and hacking seconds for 2019, guys, yep, that's the 26330. Now you have hacking seconds. Surprise. There is no way that I can explain this appreciation. It's indefensible on any but fashion grounds. At this point, I almost say, who cares with the Nautilus? Really, enough. I'm no longer interested in the Nautilus at that price. I think it's the worst of the watch collector fraternity expressing itself in economic terms. I don't dislike the watch, and I'm not against it if you're a fan. I just think the economic equation right now is bad for the hobby, and it's bad for the image of the hobby. And some people who buy thinking that this is going to be a forever investment are going to get burned badly, and I feel for them as well. So basically, we're looking at a battle of two handsome base metal integrated band watches in the 40mm range. Get the Bulgari used for 10 grand. I'm cutting straight to the chase. Get the Bulgari. Used at 10 grand, you're getting a fantastic watch. It is razor slim at 5.15 millimeters thick as an automatic, versus the Patek, which seems chunky at 8.5 millimeters by comparison. The Bulgari BVL 138 movement is only can we go full screen with that, guys? It is only 2.23 millimeters thick, and no compromise, over 36 millimeters in diameter to fill the full display case back. You're getting a solid platinum micro rotor, the right way to do it. Maximum efficiency, no expense spared, and an impressive 60-hour power reserve. Now, Peter Spiegmarin on The Naked Watchmaker has dissected one of these movements, and he has given it his imprimatur of approval, so it impresses people who really know their stuff. And I'm going to say that finish is excellent, with some hand finishing going on here, just not quite as much as the Haute de Gamme Patek, but still plenty to appreciate if you own a loupe. Technically and aesthetically, the Octo is a more impressive watch than the Nautilus, to my eye and to my mind's eye. I like it conceptually, but I also like it in fact, the way it looks. Buy this one and use the roughly $55,000 left. That's the one to get, by the way. That's the Octo. Titanium and gold, the Harrods limited edition of 10. Buy it, you can thank me later, and then use the 55 grand left over to get a whole collection of steel full bracelet sports watches. Walk right by that $70,000 5711. And I'm speaking from the heart and against my interests here because I know we're selling steel Nautiluses on thewatchbox.com. But I am not going to shill for that, which I do not believe. 1-0, viewer wrist shots. Jumping into wrist shots part 2 for this episode. 1-0 prepares for kickoff at the Chicago Bears minicamp with his Breitling Premier B01 chronograph. Charisse F. of Houston, Texas is in good company with watches live on her phone and limited edition Grand Seiko SBGM 235 GMT. Russell K. of the UK, he in our chat box tonight, races for the red line with his Patek Philippe 5370P and Ferrari. I would love to know which Ferrari, Russell. Tell me in the box. And I could see you're saying, Russell, you love your 5711. Congratulations, you got in before things got crazy. Matthew W. and his Bell & Ross BRS 64 explore the bucolic reaches of Scandinavia from altitude. Guys, send me your wrist shots so you can see your analog on my digital. Jumping into the box right here, I can see Aunt G saying Octo is the next speedy black ray. I can see my other Invicta is a Rolex saying I would buy a Corvette ZR1 for $70K over the Nautilus. You and me both. You can get a C6 ZR1 for like 55 grand and still have money left to buy the Bulgari. I can see right here we've got PF joining in from Bali, Indonesia. We have Aaron Murphy saying Tim, thoughts on the Bulgari Solotampo models? Much more affordable than the Octo. Of course, I understand why it's more, but is it a good value for the Solotampo? The more interesting Solotampos with the in-house calibers released recently are pedigreed high-grade men's watches, but you will suffer significant depreciation simply because of the Bulgari brand, which does not yet, as a man's watch brand, have the currency of a Rolex or a Patek Philippe or an Audemars Piguet. So get it used, and then you won't have any regrets, because Bulgari is one of those brands that will be around forever to service it. I like the watches. I like the proportion. You still get the Octo design. You're still getting a nice 40-ish millimeter case size. I like them with black dials best. That's a punchy color combination. And then right here, I can also see we've got E.A. Alonso joining in from Mexico City, and Thomas Burnett complimenting Matthew W.'s Bell & Ross. I like it when our viewers are into the wrist shots. You guys are the best group online. And we've got Jeff Blanchard joining in from Washington State. All right, guys. Vasily K asks, Tim, I can't decide on a new Omega Seamaster Aquaterra GMT World Timer, a 2019 novelty, I'll add, or the Rolex Explorer 2. Okay, this is Omega versus Rolex, but a very different kind of Omega versus Rolex. Let's talk about the Omega first, because it'll be the less familiar of these two watches. I love the new Aquaterra GMT. It is just a badass watch. 43 millimeters, 150 meters water resistant, Matas, coaxial, 60 hours, amagnetic, world timer functions. The dial in titanium, which is laser ablated to create the texture of the continents, is simply overpowering in its coolness. I love how Bienne, the home city of Omega, has replaced Paris on the world time scale. Lumen 150 meters water resistant, good to go. This watch has it all. The caliber 8938 offers those huge tech advances, as well as a display case back compared to the Rolex, and I prefer the strap version at $8,900. I just like the way it looks, but for a $200 upcharge, we really should talk about the Aquaterra GMT on a bracelet for $9,100, because that's the true comparison to the Rolex. But it would be, and I hate to admit this, professional malpractice by me, as a watch specialist in the industry, to recommend the Omega over the Explorer 2 if you don't plan to keep the watch forever. The Omega on a bracelet first costs $1,000 more than the Rolex, and depending on what the resale is like for these, you might wind up paying $3,000 to $4,000 more to own the Omega and then sell it versus the cost of owning the Rolex. Also, I should mention that functionally you don't lose much with the Rolex. The Rolex is sufficiently water resistant, 100 meters versus 150 meters. You don't have to worry about jumping in with this watch. It has plenty of resistance for the kind of water sports we enjoy. And I'll also mention it is critically 2 millimeters thinner than the Omega. The Rolex is 12.4, the Omega is 14.5. And by the way, the Omega's 43 millimeter case, because of that thickness, wears far larger than the 42 of the Rolex. Don't let the close size rating and basic rated diameters fool you here. The Omega is a much bigger watch, especially on the bracelet. The Rolex's face, I should also mention, is a powerful dial. Can we go full screen there? Because the details really matter here. It has more nuance and beauty. Look at the radial graining of that bezel. Look at the luster of that pearl white dial with the blackened indices and hands, the orange shock against the base, and the Explorer 2 script just under the Rolex crown, enlivening that dial with color. There's a lot more soul and character to it than online photos would indicate. Both watches have a 5-year warranty, but between the two, only Rolex makes an accuracy guarantee, which means 4 years and 364 days after buying the watch, if it doesn't run to Rolex spec, you can make a warranty claim, send it back to the factory, and get the watch back regulated with a service warranty, which means you've got years of warranty once more. So you can even cheat and get more than the 5-year warranty out of your Rolex. I'll also mention that my heart says Omega, but my head says the Rolex here. Go with the Rolex unless you're hopelessly in love with the quirky charm of the Omega, or realistically, wait until the Omega is available used and then buy it that way. Like I said, 5-year warranty, wait a few months, and you won't lose if you buy the Omega. Again, only your heart can tell you, but I can recommend simply waiting for the price to go down. Otherwise, the Rolex is the no-loss bet, especially since this watch, for the most part, is still available on request at Rolex dealers. Jumping right into the box, I can see Moro L join in. Hey, Tim, good evening. Good evening, Moro. I've got Romulus 1300 saying, gotta go with the Rolex on this one. And then we've got Steve Markham joining from San Antonio and the Watch Doctor. So the answer is, if I were to buy just one watch to wear forever, the answer is Omega right here. And then right here we've got JBO Surf saying, no dealers where I have, no, I think JBO of Adelaide is saying, no dealers here, but in Melbourne later this year, and when I go to Europe and US in September 2020, I might see the watch. It's true, the watch isn't shipping just yet, and I could see right here, we've got Omegatron saying the Explorer 2 is the worst kept secret of Rolex steel watches. Everyone says it's one nobody is getting, and yet I see a video on it daily. Still a lovely piece, but let's not kid ourselves. The reason I'm recommending it is because it's still available, and it's available without a markup. It's recognized, but when people are paying twice the price of a Daytona, it's not yet crazy. All right, jumping into the box. Edward Ledden, Tim, have you ever met William Messina? Yes, William Messina is the pen name of a gentleman named William Rohr, who is a well-known watch collector, and he is one of the most honest and, in my opinion, unassuming collectors you'll ever meet. He has a reputation as a bit of a bulldog in collector circles. He'll call people on bullshit all the time, especially when misrepresented vintage watches and auction watches come into play. But in terms of what he's like face to face, he's warm, he's sincere, he has a true and deep-seated passion for watches. And he was probably one of the most memorable individual collectors I met for that reason. And he tells me these days he's really moving away from vintage because it's a snake's nest, and it's just an ugly scene. He prefers independence over vintage these days. So a very cool guy, absolutely. And that Christopher Peterson saying 42 millimeters is just too big. In any case, all right. So we have a question here from Seth H., who asks, do you believe that manufacturer direct online watch sales will be the new brand boutique of the 2020s, the way physical brand boutiques were a preoccupation of the 2010s? This is an interesting question because the vertically integrated company store brand boutiques were a huge trend in the 2000s and this decade, the 2010s. For some, like Audemars Piguet, which has been culling its authorized dealers at a breakneck pace, the factory boutique approach seems to be working out so far. For others, like most of the Swatch brands, many of these company stores have actually closed and in some cases liquidated assets to the gray market, or the various Swatch brands are counting down until ill-considered 10-year leases on their boutiques are finally over. But now, via platforms ranging from brand websites, where you can see watches for sale and you can put them in a basket and buy them, to Richemont-owned online outlet and general luxury goods retailer Mr. Porter, you can see Swiss, and it is mostly Swiss, watch brands move actual online sales, or at least promote online sales, after 2 decades of telling us that every internet watch is more dangerous than Chernobyl. So maybe that's a big step for them. They used to tell us that every watch sold online was a counterfeit, avoid at your own hazard. And, well, frankly, that scares me a bit more than online watch buying, but the message and the line only changed very recently. And it's not quite working out because manufacturers don't seem to understand the online watch buyer. I'm going to go out and I'm going to go on a limb and assume why this is, because I know the space pretty well. I've been doing this for half a decade, and I would consider myself a source. First, the good news. Swatch Group's 2019 half-year report specifically cites increases in e-commerce. Now the bad news. This mostly applies to entry-level watches costing a few $100s, not the true luxury brands that now account for somewhere between 60 and 70% of Swatch Group's profits. In general, I'm hearing through the grapevine that e-commerce is accounting for about 2 to 5% at best of true luxury class watch sales for brands of stature. With pre-owned watch sales surging, and I can attest to this, it's true for us, it's true for Hodinkee, it's true for Crown and Caliber, it's true for platforms like Analog Shift, 1010, it's general. Vintage and pre-owned watches are doing gangbusters on the internet right now. One must ask, why is the online sales model not working for the OEMs? A few reasons. A few reasons, and they're good ones. First, watch buyers shop online for lower prices first and foremost. That's Chrono 24 right there for Omega Seamaster Diver 300 meters. Most watches lose huge amounts of value, and contrary to what you'll learn in a brand boutique, you take a bath when you buy most luxury watches, and collectors, because of online markets like Chrono 24, specialist dealers, and eBay, now know this well. Recall that Vacheron offering on Mr. Porter, remember that? Take a look. Can we go full screen right there, guys? That Vacheron sales page might be nicely written up and photographed, but the bottom line is $19,300 is the same price you'll see on Vacheron's own website. At that point, why not buy the watch on Chrono 24, 5 months old, still under warranty, and for $2,000 less money? People buy in boutiques. At the other end of the spectrum, people buy in boutiques for the experience of being unduly flattered, courted, fed chocolate, pumped with bottled water, invited to client events, and generally feted as though they were a celebrity party at Spago in Beverly Hills. Paying the exact same price to get a luxury watch FedExed to you in a box is like getting Porsche-level pricing with Chevrolet-level service. It's a mismatch of price and experience, and one that people who are into the luxury watch scene, especially new luxury watches, simply cannot stomach. Some of those Porsche dealers, let's be honest, we're auto enthusiasts here. It's a crossover interest. You've been to those stores. They are like amusement parks for adults. You get to see the cars, talk the salesman's ear off. They know what they're talking about. You can test drive, you can try, you can see, you can experience. And that same feeling is what motivates the relatively few folks who still buy new watches at brand boutiques. They want to get the whole experience. Online shoppers, in contrast, generally want the best price, period. Boutique service may or may not be a gimmick. Only you can say. But giving up the novelty and the perceived pampering of the boutique just to pay the same price online makes no sense to literally anyone. 2, online buyers are intense buyers. This is axiomatic. They tend to be people whose interest in watches has been sparked and sustained by online collector communities. It takes huge commitment to listen to a guy talk about watches for 45 minutes on YouTube, or spend hours reading a Patek Philippe collector forum for posts about a model made 25 years ago. In all likelihood, this kind of buyer doesn't even want to deal with a boutique in which nobody there personally owns the watches, and they might have all of 3 weeks experience with the Breguet brand, for example. Take an already emotional hobby, because no one needs luxury watches, and then insert buyers who arrive at the purchasing decision at something approaching expert status. It's a mismatch. If not a boutique experience, this online buyer is looking to speak at length with people who will chat for 30 minutes about a used or vintage model. On the phone, they will send you extra phone photos if you request. They will send you video showcases. I've made videos for our sales reps on request from clients who are just prospective. I've made how-to videos that I've sent to our sales reps. The level of experience you get with a dedicated online pre-owned seller is head and shoulders above simply pointing and clicking on a brand site. And it's not possible to have a discussion with someone who is a collector or an enthusiast, or even get photos and video when you go to brand websites and decide whether or not to add an Omega Seamaster to your basket and automated checkout. 3, online buyers want variety. A new watch website or boutique can only hold so many recent production watches. There's so much floor space, and it has to go to stuff made in the last 24 to 36 months. I can't even see a Nautilus stocked at a Patek Philippe boutique, but I can find far scarcer original monoblock Nautilus 3700 vintage models in 15 seconds on eBay. It's available for immediate delivery on eBay. Or I can check my own website and grab a vintage JLC Memovox that hasn't been made for 45 years, since before I was born. And I'll also mention, I can skip the tepid JLC novelties when I'm shopping online. I can go to pre-owned and skip the awful releases of the last 3 years and go back to the Amvox series, the epic Aston Martin-inspired full model line with tourbillon, alarms, limited editions, vertical trigger pusherless chronographs, and I can get that used. And it doesn't have to be us. It could be Hodinkee. It could be Crown and Caliber. It could be Matt Bain, a vintage specialist. It could be anyone who is a specialist in pre-owned watches, because you're going to get both the variety and the literacy in the product that you will not be able to get if you go to a brand website and buy a new watch. There's a huge range of cool older stuff on all of these online platforms that specialize in anything but new timepieces. So if a watch manufacturer company website and e-commerce don't offer the best prices, so if the brand's own website doesn't offer the best prices, doesn't offer white glove boutique pampering or variety, then why do these e-commerce platforms exist? There is no good answer to this question. It's probably because people at the watch brands themselves want to pitch themselves as tech companies in the worst possible cliched fashion, or e-commerce platforms, and this is probably all aimed at investors in major groups who want to hear those buzzwords. And the collectors, you and me, are left with nothing of interest when buying watches new on these platforms. Let me jump into the box and see what you guys think right here. Okay, right here we've got Jean-Claude Biver. Tim, we get the plug for Watchbox. You could sell ice to Eskimos. I'll be honest, I'm only interested in pre-owned watches. The new watches, for the most part, they're boring to me. And if I'm interested in a new watch, I wait 5 minutes and I buy it used. So yes, I plug Watchbox, but let me be honest, when I was a collector on the outside looking in, I bought watches from many different sellers, including companies that are now our rivals in the business. So I believe in the pre-owned scene and the standard of service that you can now get in the pre-owned scene. Right here, I have Kevin S. noting that I'm busting on recent JLCs, and this is absolutely true. I have not been impressed by the last few years. This year was a little bit better, but if you look back last year, we got the most humdrum array of derivative Polaris tribute watches. Now, some people have bought these watches and they enjoy them. And in terms of fit, finish, and materials, they're not bad. But if you are bankrupt of ideas, the first thing you're going to do is be the last brand to release vintage tribute watches into this market. And that's pretty close to where JLC was with that Polaris. I'll also mention that some of the Reversos that have come out the last 2 years have felt devoid of ambition. Simple steel time-only watches might be appealing in a sort of generic sense, but let's face it, the innovation of the 2000s, the Jerome Lambert era, tapered off dramatically after he left to take over Mont Blanc. After 2013, 2014, there was not a whole lot of excitement from the JLC novelties. They've had 1 year under their new CEO, so I'm giving them a grace period. I do think things will pick up. The watches were better this year. Let's build on that momentum. And then right here, we have F. Sohail joining in from the UK. Thank you for staying up late with me in the UK. And then right here, we've got Omegatron saying, just bought a Nomos on Chrono 24. Price was great, but the experience was lacking for sure. As they say, before you buy a pre-owned watch, first buy the seller before you buy the watch. But like I said, price is pretty much the biggest advantage of buying online. It's what people look for first when they go online. Right here, I could see we've got Kesog, let me see. Kesogeti. Half the fun is finding the right watch at the right price. That is true. A big part of buying online is that it seems like every click takes you down a rabbit hole towards models you never knew existed, and sometimes brands you never knew existed. I feel burned out on watches sometimes. Then I go online and I read about jump hours, or I read about Pierce vertical clutch chronographs, or I read about stuff that Gerald Genta did in the 1980s, and all of a sudden a vista opens in front of me, the horizon recedes, and I realize how little I really know. And I know nothing, because it is a huge world, and it is so deep and rich and historically polyvalent that at the end of the day, you will always find something new to animate your mind and extend your watch search. Truly, the chase is 90% of the fun of this hobby. And then right here, we've got a question from Dustin Van Patten. Tim, are you buying a new watch anytime soon? I'm going to take new watch to mean a different watch rather than one that is literally MSRP new. Yeah, I think so. I'm looking at a couple of different things right now. I'm going to add the bracelet accessory to my Zin Easy M11. You guys know this has been my one and only for a while. Watches that I'm very seriously considering at the moment. The MIH watch, designed by Ludwig Oxlin, designed by Christian Gaffner and built by Paul Gerber. It is like a greatest hits anthology of the best of Swiss watchmaking. It's swimmable, it's titanium, it's a chronograph, it's automatic, it's rare, it's nicely sized, and it's an annual calendar, all of which I love. I'm also looking at the same calendar mechanism in the Zenith Captain Windsor El Primero annual calendar. I like the steel model, 42 millimeters with the palladium fume smoked dial. At the higher end of the scale, you guys know some of my grails include the De Bethune DB28 Digital. I would get it with the smaller lugs, not the big ones, because it's already 45, but titanium, I can wear it. And I love the Lange und Sonne Zeitwerk. The white gold model, I don't need anything limited edition. I don't need anything particular. The white gold model is crazy enough for me. And I'll also mention that the Rolex Milgauss Z Blue has always been the first Rolex that I've wanted to buy. I do have other Rolex watches that I love. I would adore a 1909 white gold oyster quartz date, preferably from about 2000. Get the newest one possible, full box papers, never refinished. Get it with a dark dial if I can. That's a Rolex I would love, and I've often spoken highly. Again, this is kind of in the Zeitwerk and De Bethune price range, but the Yachtmaster white gold, in particular, the latest version of the watch, which I believe to be the rarest. Now that anyone who wants a white metal Yachtmaster 2 is going for the steel one. There have been 3 different dial variations that I know of, and the newest is the rarest. Jumping right in, Moro L asking, is there a watch box in Switzerland? Yes, there is. There is a watch box office in Switzerland, in Neuchâtel. We have a salon, we have a safe, we have an inventory, and we have a wonderful sales staff led by our own Patrick Hoffman, former CEO of Ulysse Nardin. Okay, right here. We have Christopher Peterson. Tim, what's your take on the new Omega DeVille Tracer versus a Lange und Sonne Saxonia? Okay, let's go all out. Let's talk about the Saxonia Copper Blue versus the new Tracer 125th anniversary enamel dial. That is the richest of the Trezors and a no-date dial, I believe, versus the ultimate version of the Saxonia. The Saxonia is paper thin. The Omega is thicker. Even though it is a manual wind Omega, a rare thing these days, it is considerably thicker than the Lange and it wears larger. You're comparing two things that cannot be compared. Any Lange Saxonia is going to be a handmade watch, which means that you're getting a level of fit, finish, materials, and attention to detail that is economically not possible even in the enamel dial Omega Trezors. I would say that the best buy among the Trezors is going to be the blue dial stainless steel model that came out this year, possibly the best new Omega launch of the year and way below the radar. But with the blue dial, the stainless steel case, and a movement that is still manual wind, it has all the appeal of something like a Grand Seiko SBGK 005 anniversary, but in an Omega coaxial Maytaz chronometer package. So go for the Omega if you want the value proposition. If you're looking for true virtuosity in case, in dial, in engineering, and in finish, you're going to go with the Lange, and you cannot beat that copper blue dial. It is unbeatable. Even the Chronomètre Bleu, even famous dials from brands that are defined by dials, the Grand Seiko Snowflake, FP Journe, even the Fume dial of Moser cannot compete with that copper blue Saxonia dial. So, in case you haven't gotten my drift, the Saxonia, if the budget supports. Right here, we have founder Timeless Capital saying, thanks to our fellow commenter Thomas Burnett, his founder's daily driver is an Aston Martin DB11, but he collects Porsches. But at his LA home, he has a couple of new models. At least car depreciation is a tax deduction. Pro tip right there. And then right here, we've got Nicola joining in from Seoul, South Korea, saying he is in love with the Patek Philippe 3970, but how wearable is the perpetual calendar manual wind? How much time does it take to set up with all the complications before putting it on? Well, if you keep it wound, it takes no time. Otherwise, I'm going to say you could set that watch in 2 to 3 minutes. I've done it, and I've made how-to videos for our customers that are basically just how to set a Patek Perpetual, and that's one of the models. So 2 to 3 minutes if you know how to set it. I would also say that the watch wears wonderfully because that's a 40mm case. It is a short lug span across the wrist. Unless your wrist is really small, like under 13.5 centimeters, you should be able to wear that watch. No issues right there. We've got Kanan O joining us saying, hello, Tim. Hello, Kanan. And then we have Kyle K asking, is it safe to wire money to Russians? That depends. Are you buying an election or a watch? It makes a difference. All right, here we have an invitation. We had someone asking me to meet him in Las Vegas. Let me see if I can find that comment. We've got Caliber 3135, a Rolex fan, joining in right here. And we've got Daniel T joining in, 6:30 a.m. where he is. All right, here we go. Let me see if I can find that Las Vegas comment. It's tough to keep up with this comment box. It moves really fast right here. And then we have a question. Tim, what are your thoughts on the Patek White Gold Regulator? The Patek Philippe 5235G is the watch I should have mentioned when I talked about watches I'm thinking of buying next. It is my favorite Patek Philippe ever. It is the most unique looking modern Patek. It is the most technically innovative modern Patek. It is an automatic micro rotor white gold 40.5mm annual calendar with most of the technologies from the Patek Philippe Advanced Research series. So for me, that is the Patek, the first one. If I win the lottery and can buy any of them, that is the first one and possibly the only one that I purchase for myself. Right here, we've got Tim Mosso's sunglasses telling me yellow light on the politics, Tim. Slow. All right, I'm slowing down. I'm pumping the brakes. And then we've got a question from Geezer. Tim, FP Journe Vagabondage versus Lange Zeitwerk. I prefer the Vagabondage 2 over the 3 or the 1. If you find the 1, buy it as an investment. It is rare as hen's teeth on a rooster and truly in a class by itself as a collectible and as an investment. But the Vagabondage 2 is the one to own. 68 in platinum, 69 in rose gold. It's more interesting with its jumping minutes and jumping hour than the jumping second system of the V3, which creates a lopsided and largely unappealing dial. So I go with the Vagabondage 2, but in the eliminator against the Zeitwerk, I find the Zeitwerk more balanced on the dial side, more sophisticated technically. It has a constant force device, so it is also an excellent time teller. And it has the jumping digital minutes, which I still find awesome to watch because it's a treat on both sides. Sure, the Journe is interesting to look at on the dial side, not so interesting on the back. Whereas on the back of the Lange, you've got an aerodynamic brake, you've got a Maltese cross stopworks, you've got a time bridge that conveys the power from the minute jumper and the pinwheel over to the double third wheels and the hairspring of the remontoir, and then you've got a big slow beating balance, all of it immaculately hand finished on a giant chunky Lange caliber that is worth the purchase of a $1,000 loop simply to enjoy. So to answer your question, between the Vagabondage series, any of them, and the Zeitwerk, I go for the Zeitwerk. All right, bump. We have Kevin S. Thoughts on the JLC sector dials. The first year I attended SIHH back in 2017, that was the single most interesting product that JLC launched. Based not on wristwatches, but on pocket watches from the Heritage Gallery Company Museum. These are handsome entry-level Master Series watches, the chronograph, the Master Automatic, and the Geographic. And I think the best looking of them is the Automatic. It's also the most affordable. The most useful to me is the Geographic as a travel watch, and the most popular, it seems, if you canvass the field among collectors, was the chronograph because of the way it looked. Really nice looking watches, but I do feel that because they were non-loomed and in some respects with the printed dials decontented compared to the standard models, I would own the standard models before I would own the sector dials based on functionality. I would own the sector dials if I really fell in love with the way they looked. And we've got Sinol Chu joining in from Thailand, and then we've got Holger saying Zeitwerk equals unbeatable. And we have a question. Hello from the Philippines. First time to catch the show, early morning there. Just wanted to know if you have any tips on buying pre-owned watches in Osaka, Kyoto. I would say realistically, you're going to have to check Japanese language and East Asian collector forums to find out where the best sellers are. That is, unless you're just going to go to flagship brand boutiques, if you really want to find out who the best sellers are, you need to go on watch forums where sellers are recommended. I would also say that if you're already in the Far East, consider that we now have an office in Hong Kong and opening in Singapore. I believe that office is already up and running, so you do have watch box options in the region. But specifically, the best way to find out how to buy watches locally is collector forums that serve that region and collectors from that region. Okay, jumping in, we've got JBO Surf saying a thinner Zeitwerk would be total fire, aspect ratio wise, and in fact, the new Zeitwerk date is thinner and it looks thinner because it's also broader. That would be the one for you, JBO. And then we have Dustin Van Patten saying the JLC sector dial is hard to find pre-owned. This is true. Rooted Rotor Zeitwerk is my Grail runner-up platinum Longa 1 Darth. You have excellent taste, my man. All right, jumping in right here. Bud to Stud. Tim, do you like the white gold Pepsi? There have now been 2 white gold Pepsis. 3 white gold Pepsis. There's the one that came out in 2014 with the oyster bracelet and the black dial and the caliber 3186. There is the second one that came out at the beginning of 2018, which was basically the prior watch, but now with the blue dial. And now there's a new one this year that looks just like the 2018 watch, the oyster bracelet and the blue dial, but with a different movement inside with a 3-day power reserve, which means it's really 3 different watches, the white gold Pepsi. Which one do I like best? I mean, it's hard to argue with the new watch. It's the most technically refined. The blue dial is charismatic, and with everyone jumping at the stainless steel Pepsi and the BLNR, the black and blue, it almost feels like the white gold Pepsi is undersubscribed and underrated. Hard to say Rolex GMT is underrated right now, but that one just might be. I love the watch, and I love the feel of a full precious metal Rolex. These days, with the solid links and the milled clasp on the wrist, with the solid case back of precious metal, it feels in white gold like a platinum watch from any other brand. It's a very special feeling. All right. Guys, thank you so much for joining in. I appreciate everyone who participated. We had a wonderful back and forth chat. I appreciate everyone who's watching this recorded. You guys build my volume and my views. If you got up early, if you stayed up late, if you watched in a foreign language, thank you. I am grateful. Remember, comment below and subscribe. Join me at Tim_Mosso on Instagram. This was one hell of a ride, guys. Time out, Tim out. Thanks to you, thanks to my crew, and thank you for logging on.